Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back to another episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. It's me, Tigrilla, your nature inspired mentor and certified life coach. More importantly, world ambassador for plant advocacy. Did I ever tell you the story about this title? This title came, actually, I never invented it. And it started with World Ambassador for Plant Intelligence. And it was actually given to me by several people who kind of inadvertently said it to me in different scenarios, and one person who literally posted it. So one person, a friend of mine, actually more of a collaborator, posted it on Facebook, I think it was, and said, "Oh no, Tigrilla is definitely a world ambassador for plant advocacy. No, for plant intelligence at the time." And I just loved the title. And I had other people who were telling me, you're like an ambassador for plant intelligence and for plant consciousness and plant cognition. And it just stuck. It stuck around. So over the years, as all of these different fields connected to plant intelligence have expanded, I changed the title from plant intelligence, which I felt was very reductive to all the amazingness that plants have to offer, and changed it to just general plant advocacy because I feel like that kind of encompasses the consciousness, the cognition, and all the other pieces to it. So yeah, there it is, World Ambassador for Plant Advocacy. And I take that with a lot of pride. I love working with plants in that way and being an advocate for everything that kin have to offer us. So speaking of which, today we are getting into episode 73, where we're going to talk about I'm going to read because I actually had to take a lot of notes for this one because I had to really think it through. So today we're going to talk about using natural and spiritual cycles. Welcome to ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. I'm your host, Tigrilla, nature-inspired mentor and leadership coach. In this podcast, I share ancient and modern knowledge from biology to spirituality about the wondrous ways in which plants can help you lead a naturally conscious life. The reason I include both of these is because most of the time, we actually, first of all, are not aware of our cycles. Regardless of what our cycles are, we're not really aware that there are these cycles of rhythms, you might say, that change the way that we experience the world. So let's get into how you can use these cycles to your advantage. Okay. So here's where we're going to start. We're going to start with the natural cycles, the most common natural cycles. So the most common natural cycles are, of course, the seasonal cycles, right? Our 4 seasons: summer, spring, fall, or autumn, depending on where you are and what English you speak, and winter. And these 4 seasons, each one of them has a natural rhythm. When you look at the natural world, there are certain actions that are taken in each one of these. And you as a human being actually are beholden to these. But how you approach them and how you work with them really depends on where your location is, right? We don't take into consideration enough as human beings how important location is. Location doesn't just say the difference between whether it's spring or summer, and the fact that a place like, in Australia, it's summer, where, in the Northern Hemisphere, then it would be winter. But it also talks about the fact of how that season affects your body, in the sense that I grew up, for example, in South Florida, which is nearer to the equator, where the seasons are much less impactful. But what does impact you is something that we sometimes don't take into consideration enough because of the small changes in the season. Where, for example, if I live in Norway, where you have a massive seasonal shift that happens between the winter and the summer and everything in between, it would be easier for you to understand that rhythm on how it affects your body. Now, in relation to the general seasons, there are some, and I say this because today in this world where climate is changing, where there are so many changes that are happening, it is important to understand that the human body is also going to be adapting and working with them. So it becomes even more important for us to recognize that these seasons exist and how we can work and flow and use that energy appropriately throughout the year. Now, before I get into too much depth on how the actual seasons affect you, I want to sort of point out a few other elements that I'm going to talk about. Another element that I want to talk about a lot is the day cycle as well as the moon cycle. And the reason is because, again, depending on what your belief systems are, you may or may not be aware of how these cycles affect you. But it isn't just the seasonal cycles that affect you, it is the combination of all of these that really work and change the way that your body, the way that your mind, the way that your thought processing reacts throughout the course of the day. And it is important for us to take that time to tune in and understand our cycles. And then I'm going to switch over to the cycles of more of your spiritual cycles, in the sense that depending on what your spiritual beliefs are, you have also codified within you a spiritual cycle that affects the way your physical body reacts to this information. The reason is because these codes run deep, right? When I have a spiritual belief that I actively practice, even if it's somewhat secular in the sense of, let's assume that I don't have a determined spiritual practice, but I do believe in Christmas or Thanksgiving and some of the main holidays. All of these have their own rhythms that have been codified by all the people that practice them. And so as much as I might want to separate out from this, it is very difficult to do so because there is an inherent energetic channel that gets created depending on where I live. So if you live in a place where, for example, Christmas gets celebrated really strongly, or in a place where Hanukkah gets celebrated strongly, or some combination thereafter, right? Some combination of the two, it's important to recognize that our reactions, our inherent even reactions nowadays, are going to be different based on that cycle. So in that December time period, and depending on whether you go all the way to Epiphany, for example, here where I live in Italy, it's celebrated all the way through to Epiphany. But I grew up in the United States where it was really till New Year's Eve. So until New Year's Day. So to New Year's Day, that's a different rhythm. It means that the 2nd of January, there's a clock shift that happens, where here that clock shift doesn't happen until after, for example, the 6th of January. So there is just a really important aspect of recognizing, first of all, the clocks and the cycles that are imposed on us. And this is something you see in the plant world, in the natural world in general, very clearly. For example, plants constantly adapt to what the cycles are of the location in which they live in order to understand how the ecosystem is going to react on a general baseline basis. So regardless of whether or not I have a tropical plant, like if I have a plant that is used to being in a tropical environment and I move that plant indoors, which, by the way, the majority of your house plants were probably tropical plants originally. And that's why they've been able to adapt indoors, where there's a more consistent temperature inside of your house, even if you live in the north. Even if you live in a temperature where outside it gets very cold, it's very rare that I allow that coldness to happen. So tropical plants tend to make really good houseplant friends. Because of that, they can adjust to this light. But they also can know that their cycles are not going to be the same as when they lived outdoors in their natural environment. So slowly they start to recognize what is the cycle of the temperature in that house, how does it move throughout the course of the year, and then adapt. Ferns are also like this. Ferns are extremely adaptable into understanding whether it's hot temperatures or cold temperatures, whether they're going to be on the forest floor or in a more exposed area. And so within a certain amount of level, they can adapt. By the way, an extremely important kind of ability that plants have, that as we tamp it to our plantness, we too can start to better adapt to the temperature, the thermotropism, right? The moving towards and moving away from heat. We need to learn this better, because if we're going to adapt to climate change, we better learn better how to, we better learn better. I don't know if I meant to say that in that way, but anyways, we better learn how to better calculate. Wow, I just realized those are two different uses of better, but in the same sentence. Anyway, we have to learn how to adapt better to our climate. And one of the ways we do this is by tapping into those cycles and feeling them on our bodies and understanding what our bodies need in each one of those cycles. So you have on the one side, the natural cycles, right? The seasons, depending on where you live, how those seasons operate. You have daylight cycles, how long are the days and how and the nights, what is the difference in temperature, what is the difference also in activity levels, because again, based on where you live, that changes, and also the lunar cycles. There's many other types of cycles and like lots of mini cycles, but I'm just rounding it up to those three because I think those are the ones that are most they're easier for us to understand and grasp onto. And then from there, based on where you live, there might be other kinds of rhythms, other rhythms that are natural that you can tap into most connected. Like, for example, I grew up in South Florida, so hurricane season was a big thing. There was a change in the way that we behaved during that period, which was very different from like the springtime, which almost kind of doesn't exist. It's like summer all the time. And then on the other side, you have more of a spiritual cycle that gets imposed on you, where you have things like your own spiritual calendar, depending on whatever it is that you practice, as well as, again, location matters, what it is that happens across the society in which you live. And all of these rhythms, whether you like them or not, whether you believe in them or not, are still going to affect you. So it's important for you to recognize that you do not want to just discard something like, for example, Christmas, when you don't believe in it or it's not something you celebrate. For example, again, I live in Damanhur. It's one of the largest esoteric communities in the world. We have an esoteric calendar and a rhythm that includes many different aspects. And Christmas is really not one of them from a spirituality practice. But let me tell you, the fact that I live in the first city and it's in northern Italy, you cannot get away from Christmas. Like, I was shocked to see that when I first moved here, during the December months, all of a sudden Christmas decorations were going up at the house and there was like a Christmas tree. And I kept asking, I don't understand, because I had come from an environment at the time that before I was living here, that again, I was already on my spiritual practice. I was already initiate of multiple schools and initiatic paths. And so I couldn't understand, because I didn't celebrate Christmas anymore, even though my mother loves Christmas but I just didn't celebrate it in that way. So it didn't affect. My December wasn't affected based on where I was living beforehand. But the answer I kept getting was, it's so ingrained in the Italian culture. It's almost a part of the land itself that it's impossible for you to get away from it. So therefore, why not just embrace the elements of it that you believe in spiritually, but also accept that this is a rhythm. It's a rhythm because it's a rhythm connected to work. It's a rhythm based on how people travel, on the things that they do, on the family obligations. It is a quote unquote natural rhythm to a certain extent that is imposed by our society norms, which are a part of what you live. And so now I embrace that, not necessarily as a practice, as a spiritual belief. In other words, I don't, celebrate necessarily all of the beliefs of Christmas, but I understand that December timeframe is going to be very different, and it has a rhythm associated with it. So once you've identified what are the major cycles and calendars that affect you, what do? How do you work with this in order to help you live a better life and for you to really be able to embrace your natural rhythms? So before I tell you this, I want to take a very quick break to share with you one of our eco-conscious business partners. The first time I connected with a plant and actually received a response, I got chills. It is such an invigorating sensation when you break through like that and realize just how connected we are and that we are nature. As a nature inspired mentor myself, I was super excited to stumble upon the Shift Network and its mission to empower a global network of evolutionary change agents. Talk about my kind of movement. There are so many inspiring thought leaders, healers, empaths, and other visionaries all under one roof, each with an individual and collective mission to help you reawaken and co create a just and prosperous world. Now, check out the show notes, click on the link, and learn more about the Shift Network. Consider enrolling even in a course or two. They are the perfect complement to your evolving naturally conscious life. I hope you enjoy what you find in the Shift Network and come back to the Naturally Conscious community and let us know all about what you're learning and exploring. Okay, so now you've identified the different calendars, and more importantly, the way that these calendars exist depending on where you live. Again, remember, where you live changes things, especially when you're talking about even natural rhythms and cycles. They are very different. So each one of us has an opportunity to look at these calendars and understand, first of all, their inherent rhythm. So we'll use the example of right now, I am at the tail end of summer, right? The tail end of summer, it is still relatively warm, but the temperatures are cooling in the morning and in the evening. So my daytime has a very small window that is extremely hot for now, based on where I live. And my mornings are cool and my evenings are cool. About 3 weeks ago, or even 2 weeks ago, it wasn't like that. It was basically warm the entire time with very, very small periods where it was cooler. And so I was finding myself taking naps, lots of naps in the middle of the day, right? Because my middle temperature during the day was extremely warm. I was very tuned in to the warmth of what was happening in this area, actually the heat on some days. And therefore, my mind, to be honest, when it gets that hot, doesn't work. It just doesn't. It doesn't work in the way that I expected it to work. So the idea that around the daytime hours, like right after lunch, I could actually get work done was impossible. So at some point, you just embrace it, right? You build it into your day and you understand. Now, I'm an entrepreneur, so I have the opportunity to really redesign my schedule. But let's assume you even don't. That's okay too, because you can sort of move around the type of work that you do based on what the cycle offers you, what it affords you in the sense of energy and in rhythm. So I had to take into consideration the fact that it is summertime in general. So what a summer is, blooming, the bringing every projects to fruition, allowing things to bloom, with periods of time where it's just about rest, with an understanding that my most productive times were day and night. Now, mind you, for me personally, this is okay because my natural rhythm. So many years ago, when I left the corporate world, when I left Microsoft and I left all of the technology work that I was doing, and I moved into entrepreneurship, one of the things that I wanted to do was understand my own personal cycles. What is it that is the rhythm that works for me? And I did an experiment where I got rid of all my alarm clocks. I gave myself permission to sleep or to be awake and to be productive whenever it is. I was building my business and I said to myself, I know that I am somebody who loves the work that I'm doing. Therefore, I know that I'm going to work whenever it feels right for me. And I learned that I am extremely productive right after I wake up, no matter what time that is. But right after I wake up, I am extremely productive, especially on personal care. This is when I do my breath work, my yoga, my journaling, my exercises, my anything that feels very personally enriching. And then when I sit down on my computer, I am ridiculously productive with all those types of tasks that require things to just get done. Like this is the place where I can churn out content, where I can be most thoughtful, where I am just getting really my to-do list through my to-do list. By the time I have lunch, whatever time that might be, because I work up until I feel like it could be noon, it could be 1, it could be 3, then after lunch, I'm useless. I'm useless. I don't process things very well. I am very lethargic. Or it's a great time to have client calls because for me, I don't have to like create on time. I'm listening, I'm responding, I'm having these amazing insights because my mind is not trying to work in a processing order. It's much more expansive and fluid. So if I don't have clients, I rest. I might read a casual book. I might just take a nap. I might enjoy these types of things. And then, or I might even go out and spend time with friends or stuff of that nature. And then if I have clients, it's great because my mind doesn't have any kind of preconceived notions and it's not trying to process things. It's not trying to get other work done. And then once again, if I happen to be working into the evening, my mind reawakens again. And all of a sudden, I get inspired. So my evening hours, my nighttime, again, I don't push myself in that way, but if I feel it, I am super inspired. It's when I get my best ideas, when I'm super creative. So I process in the morning. I'm much more like structured. In the afternoon, I'm just expansive and open. And in the evening, I'm creative. It's when my creativity, and it can last even until 3, 4 in the morning until I go to sleep. So I have a very like expansive way. So that's how I've understood how my mind works and my body works and my energy level works throughout the day. And therefore, I organize myself. I do not try to force myself to do content or to work on a project or to develop a speech or to do any of those types of things in the middle of the day. It doesn't work for me. Right now, it's the morning time. I am working through this because I had my creativity last night where I planned everything out and now it's in execution mode. So this is how I work. And it's really important for you to give yourself permission to figure out what your natural rhythms are. Because once you understand your natural rhythms, you can adapt them to whatever kind of day you have created. Whatever that day might look like for you, whether it's because you have a daytime job or something like that. So that's my day-to-day rhythm. That is how I connect to the light cycle of the day in general. Lunar cycles, in my case, don't really affect me. There's a long story there as to why I'm not affected by them and why I have consciously and ritually disconnected from the lunar cycles. And one day I might tell you about it. But if you instead are somebody who really connects into the lunar cycles, it would be important for you to understand throughout the course of the month, when are your more creative periods? Is it with the new moon? Is it instead with the waxing or the waning? How is it that it works? Is it all the way through to the full moon? How does that affect you? Because then you can get a better understanding of what your productivity levels are. And as you're designing your month ahead, as you're planning out the different projects you want to work on, you connect into that. This is extremely important also for multi-potentialites, multi-passionate people who have so many different ideas. For example, for me, having so many different ideas, I know that in the morning is where I can chunk out my time of working on those different ideas, where in the evening, I am much more likely to combine them or to just like follow different, forget scratching off anything on my to-do list in the evening. It doesn't work for me. So understanding these types of cycles, your let's say your sun cycles, as well as your lunar cycles, really helps you get a better understanding of your body. And then on top of that, you can add, again, your cycles connected to the natural rhythms. For example, right now, like I said, I am in the waning end of summer. So I am looking at the blooms that have happened. What has bloomed of the things that I planned sometime in the winter time and I started to execute on in the spring, and then it started to come into full bloom, and now I'm exploring what those blooms look like. I'm taking data on what those blooms were because I'm getting ready for the fall, where in the fall I am going to start to recall all the positive things, all the things that worked for me, everything that was a part of a project or of an understanding or of a lesson that I can pull into myself in order for me to get ready for the wintertime when I will reevaluate all of that and I will understand how I'm going to work it. So right now, what I'm doing is gathering data from these blooms that are at the end of their cycles. So these could be projects that I worked on that I launched in the spring or in the early summer. This could be different groupings that I maybe maybe facilitated and I have analysis and data from. So I'm trying to capture everything because I haven't yet made a decision of what I'm going to do with it, because I have to still analyze it. And that analyzation part for me will come in the autumn period. The autumn period, I will start to analyze, pull in the nourishment. So if you think about it from a deciduous tree, right, you think about it from the perspective that in the autumn is when deciduous trees start to pull back. When you see all those colors changing on the leaves, what's actually happening is that the tree is pulling in all the nourishment that could be useful to the tree in the winter period. So I'm pulling in all of that nourishment, but I haven't started that process yet because I don't even know what the nourishment is. I don't know what's inside of my leaves yet or my blooms yet. I don't know that because I haven't done that part, because I've been busy executing on it. Now that I've executed on it, I can start to the collection of data that's going to head into the autumn, and then the collection of data and the conscious choice to say, this stays in, this goes out. This is something that didn't work for me and is not something I'm going to continue moving forward. And this is something that is. Now, this for me personally ties into one of the really important cycles that I follow as part of my spiritual path. This is how I marry the two. Right now, we are at the end of the Damanhurian year. So as a Damanhurian, we have a year cycle that starts on the 1st of September. So it's perfect for this period of starting off the new year, which is kind of the equivalent of the winter time, with that analysis. So what I am doing, it's my end of year, I'm taking inventory of all of, again, what I worked on throughout the course of the year, spiritually as well as physically. I'm looking at it from my business, but I'm more looking at it as to how does it affect my spiritual path, because I'm superimposing what is for me a spiritual cycle that's extremely important, which is the Damanhurian cycle. So this for me is the end of the year. That's why I am closing off all of those projects from the perspective of I'm giving them, that doesn't mean I'm stopping my projects. It just means I'm giving them I'm taking a snapshot of them and I'm looking at it as a natural sort of closure so that I can start the process of analysis of what I'm going to do going forward. So that the new year for me starts with saying, these are the things that I want to focus on. I'm not launching them, because we're not ready for that yet, right? I haven't come into the fall where I've really sucked in all of the goodness, all the nourishment that these projects or these ideas or these experiences have to offer. I'm identifying them and I'm closing them out in a chapter and I'm taking a snapshot of them. And this for me is an important thing I do at the end of August every single year, matching in with the fact that it is the hottest period of the time. So I know that a lot of this snapshot is not going to be critically analyzed yet because it's too hot. So the physicality of where I live, the physicality of my environment, and the fact that many people travel means I have to have a good closure by the end of the year. But it's not a closure as in I'm working. It's more of a closure of, okay, I have energetically put a pin on something so that I can mark it where it is. I've given it a sort of shape, and I know that I'm going to then analyze it and look into it to make decisions in the new year. That being said, I do that with a lot of spaciousness, with a lot of rest in between, and a lot of passive reflective analysis. This is not a time for me, given the heat perspective. So the summer, end of summer, the beginning of what will be autumn, it is not a period for critical analysis yet because my mind is not there yet. What it is for gathering up and giving something a natural arc. I hope that makes sense. It's a concept that I think for some people can be a little tricky, because each one of us is going to do this in an independent way. What I'm really trying to impart for you is that now is the time for you to, first of all, identify what are the cycles that affect you most, both natural cycles, also societal cycles, as well as spiritual cycles. What is it that affects your calendar? Are you pagan and therefore follow a pagan calendar? Are you connected to other kinds of rituals, maybe in a more esoteric aspect, that guide the way that your year pans out, the way that you organize your year. And then again, what is the natural cycle of the location that I live in? How does summer and winter and autumn as well as winter, how do they affect me? How different are they? What changes? Am I living in a place of extreme cold where I expect that I'm going to be indoors doing lots of emotional analysis, lots of critical thinking, lots of time where I'm going to give myself concentrated moments, but I know that they're going to be short lived because my daylight hours are short. In my case, it would be like the actual work that I do because my daylight hours are short. Remember, I told you I'm very active in the morning, are going to be very concentrated, but my creative hours, my nighttime hours, which for me is a period of creativity, are really big. So winter for me is an excellent opportunity to conceive of new ideas, to give birth to new ideas from the perspective of allowing myself to say, ooh, taking in what I gathered from myself in the autumn, what I brought back in, the nourishment, I am now able to think about this during the winter time in a very creative, expansive way so that I can launch it in the spring, which matches a lot the Damanhurian cycle where we start the new year in September. So I start to critically analyze all of that data so that I can choose what I'm bringing into me. And then we have the apagomental days, which start at the end of the physical solar year, at the end of December and through to January, which is the place where I kind of put a stake in the ground and I say, these are the projects I'm going to carry out in the following year. For more information about the apagomental days, I'll link in a podcast episode where I've talked all about this. And I also have a few articles on my website where I go in depth as to what are the apagomental days, why are they important, why are these days out of time so important to launching new projects for the coming solar year. So really, this is a period for you to start to identify what are the different aspects, what are the different cycles that affect you. And then from there, how do you want to use them? Where do they superimpose? Are there any points of contradiction or conflict, which is important for you to also recognize? You could have a physical season that is very much around rest, and yet from your spiritual perspective, you have action. So if you take this rest and the action and you put them together, what happens? This is important. This is extremely important for you to do, because if not, you will have an internal conflict with yourself and you won't understand. But knowing what these two are, you can break them down even more to see what kind of rest is it and what kind of action. Because one might be physical rest with mental action, and that you can do. One might be mental rest and physical action, which gives you like, I'm going to go do and chop wood. I'm going to be really active on doing things that I've already planned, execution mode, rather than creative mode where I have to create something new or detail or plan something new, right? So understanding which cycle requires which thing allows you to then step deeper into your own talents and bring these out. And also will allow you to see, oh, well, I'm in a period where this is happening, but I don't really have that skill set. Who can I bring in? Who can I collaborate with in order to better execute on that? So this is having this type of information, really understanding this for yourself, your day-to-day cycles, your month cycles through your lunar cycles, for example, your seasonal cycles, and then your spiritual cycles, which also, again, could have a daily rhythm. Like, for example, for me, again, my breath work, my spiritual practice, for some people who do Qigong or who do other kinds of martial arts, things that connect your spiritual, you might find that understanding your day cycles better makes it easier for you to decide where to put that into your day-to-day life. So really working with these natural cycles, both like chosen cycles, such as your spirituality cycles, your societal cycles, which again are going to influence the field in which you've immersed yourself in, and then the seasonal cycles or the cycles that are natural rhythms that the ecosystem has, allows you to become much more conscious of how to use and sometimes conserve your energy. And this is really the goal. It's about taking conscious action when appropriate, in flow with who you are and what you want to accomplish. So I hope this has been useful. As always, you can jump into the Naturally Conscious community and we can talk about it in more detail. The Naturally Conscious community is your premier ecosystem, online ecosystem for nourishing your plant reawakening and all of your natural rhythms into a naturally conscious leader. So this is the place. Again, the details are in the show notes so that you can just click on the link and join us. And we have plenty of great activities to help support you no matter where you are in your rhythms and in your cycles. But I'd like to know, you can either add it as a comment here or you can put it into the Naturally Conscious community. What's your natural rhythms? What are the calendars of the natural cycles and the spiritual cycles and even the societal cycles, the cultural cycles that affect you the most? And has understanding those changed the way that you interact with the day-to-day or how you plan out your current year or even just your current season? So let me know in the comments, put it into the Naturally Conscious community, because I really want to hear, how are you using this to help you achieve your life purpose? If you have any questions, you know where to find me. I'm always in the Naturally Conscious community. And so come on in, become a sprout, and join us. So that's it for me. Remember to resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. This is Tigrilla Gardenia. I'm out. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. Intro and outro music by Steve Shuley and Poinsettia from The Singing Life of Plants. So join me, Tigrilla Gardenia, and my plant collaborators next time on ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. Speak soon.